Hey, what's up? It's Cute What If? This side. Today we will be seeing what if Deku met the dragon hero Draken. Before we move ahead with the FIC, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for future what ifs like this. Name: Draken Tatsuma. Age: 15 to 16. Height: 5 feet 9 inches. Blood type: Personality: Draken is very shy, often hiding his features behind his hair and eyes because of his insecurities. He becomes nervous easily and, due to his harsh upbringing, tends to be blunt. He sometimes struggles with impulsive behavior. Looks and quirk: he can sprout black scales from his skin. They are fragile and typically appear on his arms. They can flare out like spines but offer little protection. Family: Father Ryuji Tatsuma. Draken hates and fears him. Ryuji usually does not acknowledge Draken, and when he does, it is to reprimand him. His quirk is the ability to transform into a massive black eastern dragon. Mother Ryuka Tatsuma. Draken also hates his mother and is terrified of her cruelty. She treats him more like an animal than a son. Her quirk allows her to become a winged serpent covered in colorful feathers. Sister Ryuko Tatsuma. Draken and Ryuko have a strained relationship. They barely speak after a fallout. Ryuko repeatedly tries to reconcile, but he remains distant. Her quirk allows her to transform into a Western dragon. 9 years earlier, a large traditional estate in Japan rested on a hill overlooking a brilliant city. The sky stretched wide, sunlight and white clouds giving way to the estate's wooden gates, which opened for a blacked-out car to roll into the property. When the car stopped, a young blonde girl stepped out, expression straight but tired, and she sighed inwardly that it had been a long day. The front doors swung open and a little blonde boy with a draconic mouth appeared a few feet away. Draken brightened at the sight of his sister Ryuko and ran forward, his sharp teeth visible in a smile as his crimson eyes closed. He hugged her with the eager affection of a younger sibling. Ryuko crouched and opened her arms to embrace him, joy warming her face. Ryuko noted that Draken seemed excited and asked what had him so lively. He explained that he had a surprise for everyone at dinner. Ryuko responded that she could not wait to hear it, then noticed a scuff on Draken's face and asked if the other kids at school had been picking on him again. Draken admitted that they had been teasing him, saying he looked like a monster. Ryuko placed a hand on his shoulder, insisting that he did not look like a monster and that she loved the way he looked. Draken, uncertain, said Ryuko was only saying that because she was his big sister and feared their mother agreed with the bullies. Ryuko's heart broke at the reminder of their mother's treatment. She told him that their mother was wrong and that if Ryuko accepted him, that should be enough. Draken's crimson eyes brightened, and he clung to his sister's hand, relieved. Ryuko promised to get him cleaned up and to tell their father about the bullies, then mischievously suggested they sneak treats in the kitchen later. Draken lit up at the idea, and the siblings walked inside hand in hand. That night, under a sky of stars and a bright moon, the family sat around a low table in the dining room. 4 people were kneeling around a spread of food. Draken sat next to Ryuko and ate messily while she laughed softly. Ryuka fixed them with a glare that made them settle immediately. Ryuji ate with his eyes closed. Ryuko told their parents that they had practiced rescue training at school that day. Ryuka responded with proud interest and asked whether Ryuko had received any praise from teachers or peers. Ryuko answered that she had been recognized but insisted she preferred humility over boasting. Ryuka praised that mindset and sought her husband's agreement. Ryuji opened his eyes and emphasized that the family did not flaunt their power but proved themselves through action. He said that Ryuko would go far with that attitude. Ryuko beamed at their praise, then mentioned that Draken had said he had a surprise. Ryuka dismissed the idea and expressed no interest, criticizing Draken and accusing him of causing trouble at school. Ryuko defended her brother, saying the children at his school were the ones picking on him. Ryuji advised that if Draken did not want trouble, he should stay out of sight and avoid being an easy target. Draken looked down shamefully as small scales appeared across his hands. Ryuka scoffed in disgust and reminded him that she had told him to stop manifesting those scales. Ryuka scolded that he would leave the disgusting flakes all over the floors. She moved closer to Draken and took his hand, asking their parents if he could at least tell them his surprise. Both parents exchanged annoyed noises and, reluctantly, agreed. Draken looked at his parents with trembling nerves and explained that he was truly happy for Ryuko because she was going to be a hero like their father and grandfather. He swallowed and steadied himself before adding that he wanted to become a hero too. His parents stared with unreadable expressions. His mother responded coldly, questioning his sanity, and Draken lowered his eyes. He admitted sheepishly that he had a quirk and that he wanted to be a hero just like their father, promising to do all the training and take every test. Their father intervened, voice sharp, insisting that wanting it was not the issue. He said that if they had wanted him to be a hero, they would have made an effort, and bluntly declared that Draken could not be a hero because he was weak. Draken tried to protest that he could get stronger. Ryuka sneered with disgust, blaming his quirk for what she perceived as a flaw in his appearance and telling him the best thing he could do for the world was to stay out of the way. Her words cut him deeply and he clutched his shirt, hearing Ryuko's earlier comforting words replay in his mind. Ryuka said Ryuko defended him only because she was kind, a trait she praised for heroes, and added that she would never be proud of someone like him. Their father joined in, telling Draken that he would never be a hero and that he was barely even a Tatsuma. Tears welled in Draken's eyes as he insisted it was not fair and that all he wanted was to make them proud, just like Ryuko. Ryuka scoffed and told him to stay quiet and out of his sister's affairs, leaving hero work to the real Tatsuma clan members. She dismissed him as if he were an insect and said she would never be proud of him. Draken, desperate, asked Ryuko to tell their parents that he could be a hero despite being weak and looking different. Small black scales appeared across his skin, a visible sign of his distress. Ryuko glanced at their mother, who returned a dark look. After a long pause, Ryuko stood and told Draken that their parents were right, that he could not be a hero with his power and the way he looked, and that he was simply not like them. The smile drained from Draken's face. He turned and ran out of the room, sobbing and shouting that he hated them all. Ryuko called out for him to wait, but their mother stopped her, saying he needed to learn his place. Their father nodded, and Ryuko sat down, defeated and guilty. As Draken fled down the hall, a fierce spark appeared in his eyes. He burst into his room, dropped to the floor on his hands and knees, and cried with a mixture of pain and anger. A crimson glow pulsed across his chest. 9 years later, the crimson light faded and revealed a tidy room with a rack of stylish clothing, a desk with a computer, and walls adorned with old posters of video games, TV shows, and movies. A bed held a human-shaped lump, sleeping. The phone on the bedside table began to ring. The figure in the bed groaned and reached for the phone, missing it several times before finally sitting up and grabbing the device. He was Draken, older now. His hair fell over brilliant crimson eyes and his draconic mouth was more pronounced. He saw multiple missed calls from Ida, Ryuko, and Kuga, and listened to Ida's string of urgent voicemails insisting that Draken get to school on time or risk being marked absent. Draken sighed at the fuss and muttered that it was only school. He threw off his blanket, changed into his uniform, and sent a quick message to Ida saying he was on his way. He opened his door and stepped into a long hallway, a bag slung over one shoulder and his hands in his pockets. As he headed down the hall, he cleared Ryuko's messages and checked Kuga's, which asked if everything was all right. Draken responded with a thumbs up and continued on, then paused when he noticed the door to his mother's private room slightly ajar. He tiptoed toward the doorway, thinking he could sneak past without being noticed, and peered in. Ryuka sat with her back to the open door, a cup of tea in hand. She set the cup down as Draken watched from the hall. She faced away and ordered him to stop. Draken paused and covered his mouth as she stood up and turned toward him, telling him she had thought he was already gone. He covered his mouth and told her that he had been heading out, his voice carrying an unmistakable fear as he addressed her. She surveyed him with disgust and told him to get out of her face, saying he made her sick. She turned back to the table and told him to make sure he brought the application forms home from school this time, complaining that the mother's signature requirement irritated her. Draken thought that it was not easy for him either. A faint dark crackle ran along his form as he muttered that she was a witch. Ryuka glanced back and demanded what he had said. Draken replied that he had said of course, mother. She turned away with a cold stare. He continued on, thinking that he just wanted this year to end so he could go to business studies school and get a job that would take him far away from this place. The crackle returned around his left fist as he thought about being away from these people. He slammed his fist against the nearby wall in frustration. The impact left a visible crack and some splinters in a stylized, animated flare, and he moved on. He reached the front door and pushed it open to the courtyard. An older man with white hair and a beard shaped oddly like a dragon's lower jaw stood by a black car. The man greeted him respectfully. Draken told him he did not need to call him sir and walked toward the car. The man, Kuga, chuckled and opened the back door for Draken, insisting that it was only respectful to greet members of the family accordingly. Draken climbed into the car and said that he was not really considered a member, and Kuga's expression faltered. Kuga shifted to the driver's seat, adjusted the mirror to look back at Draken, and encouraged him, acknowledging that Draken's parents were difficult but urging him not to be too hard on himself. Kuga added that he considered Draken a member of the family regardless. Draken rested his chin in his hand and thanked Kuga quietly as the car pulled away. The view widened to show the city in the distance while the gates opened to let the car out and take Draken to his school. Later that day, the black car rolled to a stop in front of Somei Junior High School. The back left door opened and Draken stepped out with a weary sigh. Kuga called from the driver's seat and told him to enjoy his day. Draken muttered that Kuga would never drop that, and Kuga smiled as the windows rolled up. Draken turned to face the school as the final bell rang. Inside the school, Draken rounded a corner and slipped into the classroom. He bowed to the teacher in apology and went to his seat in front of Ida, who immediately began lecturing him as usual, prompting laughter from their classmates. Draken remained quiet as the teacher began to address the class. The teacher reviewed the admission forms and noted that almost all of the students were applying for hero schools. He grew surprised when he saw that Ida had applied to UA, and he told the class that he was proud of Ida for that. Ida stood and proclaimed that the Ida family had been heroes for several generations and that it was only natural for him to follow in their footsteps, delivering the statement with rigid posture and seriousness that made the class exchange awkward looks. Draken daydreamed and wondered how long it would be before Ida started shouting. Ida frowned and began energetically underscoring his duty to uphold his family's legacy and to join UA High School as the best hero school. Draken felt a bead of sweat at the intensity and thought that it might be a new record for Ida. The teacher asked Ida to be seated, and the class chuckled and whispered. The teacher then turned his attention to Draken and said that Draken had not handed in his admission form. Draken covered his mouth and admitted that he had lost it, speaking softly. The teacher's expression darkened as he told Draken he would have to find it and bring it in as soon as possible, reminding him that this was his final year of middle school and urging him to take it more seriously. Draken nodded and looked out the window while Ida watched him curiously. The teacher moved on to begin the day's lesson. At the end of the day, the final bell rang and Draken walked out with his hands in his pockets. Reached outside, a familiar voice called from behind and Ida came charging at him in a full sprint. Draken's eyes widened at the sudden approach, and he told Ida to slow down. Ida stopped abruptly and put a hand out, scolding Draken for forgetting his forms and warning that he could not keep being negligent. Draken looked away and said softly that there were still a couple of months to hand the form in and that the applications did not close until closer to the new year. Ida's eyes widened and he demanded why Draken would waste such valuable time. Ida chopped the air emphatically, urging Draken not to waste time worrying about which hero school to apply to and instead to be training. Draken looked down, thinking that he had never told Ida he was not joining a hero school. He sighed, covered his mouth, and told Ida that he was not going to join. Ida's eyes widened in shock as he leaned back and gestured with his hands, incredulous that Draken would refuse to follow the family tradition of becoming a hero. Draken turned away with a huff and insisted he simply would not, asking Ida to stop badgering him. He clenched his fist and said his family did not need him to be a hero and that they already favored the one they had. Ida softened and asked what Draken meant. Draken shrugged that hero work was not for everyone and hinted that, even if he wanted it, he would not be allowed. Ida grew concerned at the suggestion that Draken would be prevented from choosing his own path. Draken stated he was not there to reveal all of his business. They were friends, But in the end Ida would become a hero and Draken would just be a regular person. Ida's expression hardened briefly before relaxing into quiet resolve. He called Draken to answer one thing to his face, whether the expectations Draken spoke of were truly his own or simply what others wanted. Kuga watched from the car at a distance and thought that young Draken had been conditioned by his parents and could not make decisions for himself. He urged Ida softly to try to show Draken a new path. Draken insisted that Ida did not understand and repeated that he wanted a normal life and had given up on the dream of being a hero. Ida stepped forward with fierce conviction, refusing to accept that Draken did not want to be a hero. He reminded Draken that they had been friends since middle school and that he had seen how Draken reacted to heroes, how he spoke of them and idolized them. Ida could not believe Draken would truly not want that life. Memories flashed through Draken's mind, watching heroes on television and feeling a distant longing, sharing ideals with Ida, and the way he had once idolized those who protected others. Draken chastised himself inwardly to let it go and told himself that ordinary people liked heroes too. Ida declared that Draken was not ordinary and called him by name, recalling that Draken was his best friend. He asked again, insisting that this time Draken should answer for himself, not for his family. In that charged moment the courtyard seemed to brighten. Ida's resolve appeared as a bright light reaching toward Draken, whose own doubt gathered as a dark shroud. For a fleeting, dramatic instant the air tightened around them like an anime scene. Shadowy impressions of pressure gripped Draken's shoulders as Ida extended his hand. Draken felt something stir within him. A warm, red glow flared from his chest and a surge of clarity pushed back the darkness and erased the grasping impressions. He moved, reaching into the light and finally admitting that he did want to be a hero, that he wanted to prove himself and show others he was not to be underestimated. The glow strengthened and the tension broke as his hand closed in Ida's. They stood together in the ordinary school courtyard afterward, hands briefly clasped. Draken realized he had been holding Ida's hand and stepped back, calling the moment strange. He reflected that his body had seemed to act on its own and noticed a faint ripple of shadow across his form. He confessed that he had always wanted to be a hero like his father and sister but had never fought for it and had given up. Ida nodded in understanding and offered to help train him, saying it was never too late to try again. He asked which hero school Draken would apply to. Draken answered that he intended to apply to UA, the same as his father and Ryuko, resolved to get in and prove everyone wrong. Ida brightened at the news, reminding Draken that the entrance exam was in 10 months and urging immediate training. He launched into plans for a regimen and then sprinted off at high speed, leaving Draken momentarily frozen. Draken felt gratitude toward Ida for helping him realize something important, and a hard, determined flash colored his eyes. He vowed inwardly that he would make those who had doubted him regret underestimating him. Kuga watched Draken approach the car and wondered if something new had awakened in him, uncertain whether it would lead to good or ill. The view pulled back to show Ida sprinting into the distance as Draken climbed into the black car. Draken resolved that day to become a hero at any cost, to prove he was not weak or a mistake. He thought of himself as a dragon and prepared for the journey to become the strongest he could be. Darkness closed in briefly as an ominous growl of anticipation echoed, the sense that something had been set in motion. 2 days later, at the secluded training grounds, Draken arrived in training clothes after Kuga had driven him to the address Ida had provided. The black car pulled up to the fenced area and Draken stepped out, looking around at the unfamiliar place. Kuga called from the car that he was glad Draken had accepted Ida's offer to train. Kuga remarked that it was wonderful to see Draken out of the house. Draken looked back with a deadpan expression and wondered if he could really be that introverted, then sighed and scanned the fenced area, noting that Ida had told him to meet there and wondering where he was. An engine hummed in the distance. Kuga peered through the windscreen and noticed a dust cloud on the horizon and suggested it might be another vehicle. Draken narrowed his eyes as a serious silhouette sprinted through the dust. Ida rushed past, sending a gust that covered Draken in dirt. Ida stopped, smiled, and expressed relief that Draken was on time. As the dust settled, Draken dusted himself off and, in a blunt tone, said he was early and asked if Ida had started training without him while eyeing Ida's sporty attire. Ida laughed and shook his head, explaining that the run he had just done was not even his warm-up and that he ran every day from home to his family's training grounds. Draken indicated the fences with his thumb and asked if the place was a junkyard. Ida admitted the fence was old but then focused on what mattered, Draken's training. Draken scratched his cheek and sheepishly revealed that he had never trained beyond school P. Ida's glasses flashed and he reacted with disbelief, remembering Draken's clumsy moments in P. He asked for confirmation, and Draken simply denied the exaggeration. Ida sagged briefly, then announced that he had already prepared a training and eating plan and produced a neat stack of papers. Draken covered his mouth in surprise at the plan Ida had made in 2 days and observed that Ida was very serious. Ida softened, said he believed Draken could become a hero, and emphasized that heroism ran in his blood. Draken huffed that blood alone would not make his quirk useful. Ida, puzzled, praised Dragonscale as a quirk with strong defensive and offensive potential if trained properly. Draken admitted that his quirk was far from that level and that even a scuffed knee with Dragonscale activated still left him vulnerable. Ida acknowledged that lack of training left the quirk undeveloped and estimated that, while progress wouldn't be instant, hard work could make a difference. Draken looked down and pledged to do whatever it took, thinking of his parents and sister with a quiet resolve to make them pay. Ida smiled, produced a key and unlocked old steel doors that rolled open to reveal a vast training ground with a massive running track and 2 nearby buildings. Ida introduced it as the Ida Family Training Ground. Draken marveled and asked incredulously if the family owned the facility purely for training. Ida confirmed the family's long line of heroes and the licensed training facility passed down through generations and noted that he had trained there since childhood. Draken admitted it sounded incredible and briefly wondered whether his life might have been different if he had been more like Ryuko. Ida put a hand on his shoulder and urged him to stop daydreaming and begin training. Draken nodded, turned toward Kuga, and mouthed that they would be getting started and that Kuga could head home. Kuga smiled kindly from the car, encouraged Draken to enjoy himself and train hard, then started the engine and drove off. Draken and Ida exchanged a determined nod. Training began in earnest. Draken later reflected that it had not been easy. Ida toured him around the grounds and explained the regimen before pushing him through demanding drills. Draken managed 2 push-ups and collapsed, sprinted a few meters and cramped, attempted sit-ups and felt nauseous. By the end of the first day he lay exhausted on the ground, drenched in sweat. Ida wiped his forehead and noted that it was a start while Draken groaned. At first the routine felt like an unwelcome chore, but Draken resolved to continue. Over the next 2 weeks he began sneaking out at night. His mother waited outside his door with an angry expression and his father later spotted him in the gardens. At the training grounds, Ida easily outpaced him during laps, calling as he passed that he was on Draken's left. Draken muttered a frustrated curse under his breath and pushed himself harder. As time passed, the workouts intensified. During one session, Ida observed distinctive features along Draken's back. Hard, bony ridges along his shoulder blades and a row of spiny formations running down his spine, features that gave his silhouette a striking, almost otherworldly quality. Ida made a mental note while Draken continued his exercises without discomfort, focused on improving. Later, Ida was demonstrating combat techniques to Draken using a modern padded training dummy with a steel frame. Draken threw a sloppy punch using his scales. The impact rattled through his arm, some of his scales momentarily flaking away, and he fell to his knees, doubled over in pain. Ida watched with concerned shock. Draken reflected that sooner than he expected, things began to improve. 3 months passed. Draken ate by himself in the dining room, following Ida's planner and finishing everything on his plate. He paused when his mother appeared in the doorway with a glare. A tense confrontation followed. The next day Draken, using Ida's training and his improved quirk control, delivered a strong punch to the training dummy that sent it sliding into the nearby wall and left hairline cracks. Draken turned to celebrate, only to find Ida standing with a trowel and plaster, attempting to patch the damage. After that, Draken was seen on a ladder repairing the wall he had broken. More time passed and Draken trained relentlessly with his scales active. Each time they shed, he reformed them quickly and without loss of quality. Ida took note of Draken's increasing strength and speed and the growing determination he carried. Later, at home, Draken took advantage of his mother's casual inattentiveness to have her sign his UA forms while she thought the paperwork was for something else. She scoffed in disgust when she realized what had happened. Draken realized the day had come. 7 months went by. Draken stood in the center of the training ground in his training gear, tensing his body and clenching his fist as sharp black scales flickered along his arm. The sun was setting, coloring the sky orange, and Draken felt a surge of confidence. Ida ran up and slid to a stop, noting that tomorrow was the entrance exam. Ida nodded with a smile and said he was proud of how determined Draken had been over the past 10 months. Draken responded with a soft, embarrassed thank you and raised his fist toward Ida as an offering of a fist bump. Ida reacted with surprise and light-hearted amusement at the gesture. Draken told Ida not to make it weird, and Ida returned the fist bump. The two friends looked at each other with quiet warmth. A phone rang and Draken assumed it was Ryuko calling. Ida asked who it was. Draken's expression darkened when he saw it was his mother calling. He answered and his mother ordered him to come home immediately. In Draken's family home, his mother sat with a grim expression while gripping Draken's UA acceptance letter. In the study, Ryuji sat at his desk with a closed expression as his wife ended the call. Draken felt an overwhelming sense of dread as he pocketed his phone. Told Ida that he had to go because of family matters. Ida urged him to rest and wished him luck for the big day. That night, at the Tatsuma estate, Draken rode in with Kuga and remained quiet during the trip. Kuga asked if he was okay. Draken answered that he would be fine and went up the steps into the house, noting that his mother sounded angrier than usual. He saw the light on in his father's study and stopped at the doorway. Both parents were there. His father seated at the desk and his mother standing nearby. Draken sat across from them when his mother instructed him to sit. He asked softly if something was the matter. Ryuji closed his eyes and then fixed Draken with a stern gaze, asking whether Draken thought he was foolish. Draken stammered that he would never think that. Ryuji slid the UA admission papers, the entrance acceptance letter, and Draken's eating and training plans across the desk and accused Draken of defying their authority and of not even trying to hide it. Ryuka slammed her hands on the desk and accused Draken of applying to a hero school and tricking her into signing the forms. Draken tried to explain, but Ryuji interrupted, insisting that nothing Draken could say would change their decision and reminding him that they had told him years ago that he would never be a hero. Draken asked why, insisting that he had a quirk, that he had grown stronger over the past 10 months and could fight. Ryuka reacted with anger, yelling that he dared voice such opinions to them. She reached forward and struck him across the cheek in a sharp reprimand that left his face stinging. A few small scales appeared near his eyelid and on his forehead. Ryuka scoffed with disgust and reminded him that they had provided for him his entire life, including education, shelter, and clothing, and now he had gone against them. Ryuka shouted that she should strangle him. Draken looked down, hiding his eye beneath his hair, fingers curled under the table as a faint dark aura flickered along his hands. Ryuji accused Draken of gross disrespect toward him and his mother, of manipulating her, sneaking off the grounds, and dragging Kuga into the trouble out of selfishness when he had already been told no. He noted a wetness at the edge of Draken's hidden eye and added that the punishment had been deserved. Ryuka scoffed and said they should have sent him away years ago, that she had known he would be a problem. Ryuji closed his eyes and reminded them that his family would never accept Draken. He was nothing like either of their clans. He sighed and said the rejection had started at his birth, and both clans had turned him away. Ryuka frowned and demanded what they were supposed to do with him now, saying that this stunt made things worse than when he had been younger. Draken's fists tightened and his breath quickened. He seethed inside, filled with hatred he could not voice. His heart thudded, a strange surge of energy made his eyes glow beneath his hair, and he gripped the edge of the desk with renewed resolve. He offered a deal. Ryuji and Ryuka exchanged raised brows. Ryuji asked for clarification. Draken proposed that if he could pass the UA entrance exam and enroll, they would let him join them. If he failed, he would submit to any terms they demanded. Ryuka stalked around the desk and accused him of thinking he could make deals. She reached out, gripped his long hair and pulled his head up so his fearful eyes were visible, threatening to teach him a lesson. Ryuji intervened, telling her to wait and to hear him out. Ryuka protested loudly and tugged harder. Draken winced. She released him with a shove and folded her arms. Draken insisted that he simply wanted a chance to try. Ryuji asked what exactly he intended to try and warned that if Draken failed, he would be bound to obey his parents for the rest of his life. The thought that failure would bind him to them forever struck Draken as unacceptable and insane. Ryuji stated that those were his conditions. Ryuka reacted in disbelief at the idea of letting him attempt it, but Ryuji argued that he expected Draken to fail, which would then allow them to do as they pleased. Ryuka looked at Draken and, with a cold grin, declared that he would never get into UA and that it was far beyond his reach. The morning light painted the city as a car climbed through the streets. Draken sat quietly, staring out the window. Kuga glanced in the rearview and noted in a gruff voice that Draken seemed unusually quiet. Draken covered his mouth with his hand and muttered that there was not much to say. Earlier that night, Draken had sat at the study desk across from his father while his mother stood nearby, ready to scold him harshly. He had just agreed to a deal that would tie his future to his parents. If he failed, he would give up his freedom and obey them completely. His father, Ryuji, closed his eyes and agreed to the terms, warning that failure would leave him with no freedoms and nothing to speak of. His mother, Ryuka, scoffed and made clear her low opinion of him. When Draken asked, standing to go, that they leave him alone and let him pursue his own path, his father affirmed that a deal was a deal. Once Draken left the study, Ryuji sat back and muttered to himself that the UA entrance exam was not what Draken expected and that he would fail. Ryuka, eyes cold, dismissed him as an embarrassment and questioned why they had allowed him to take part at all. Alone in his room afterward, Draken clenched his fists. A furious crimson glint shone in his left eye from beneath his hair, and scales began to form across his arms. He vowed to himself that he would prove them wrong. Back in the present, the car crested a hill and pulled up beside a massive wall. Beyond it, the school building of UA rose up, grand and imposing. Kuga told him that they had arrived. Draken felt awe. He had always dreamed of this place and found it even more impressive in person. He told Kuga he would see him later. Kuga offered encouragement, urging Draken to do his best and saying he was rooting for him. Draken pretended indifference and looked away, a faint flush on his cheeks, before stepping out of the car in his middle school uniform with a backpack slung over his shoulder. He walked through the gates and felt a twinge of excitement. Two girls from another school nearby whispered that he looked like a freak and creepy. Draken froze, misreading their whispers as attention, and braced himself until an ash-blonde boy shoved past and dismissed him as an extra, telling him to get out of the way. Draken apologized and watched the boy pass, annoyed with himself for backing down. A girl then approached and, with a friendly air, complimented his appearance and pointed out that his bag was open. Embarrassed, Draken hurried to fix it while the girl chuckled and ran inside. A green-haired boy passed by, laughing and blushing as if at something amusing, leaving Draken to sigh and think that his social skills left much to be desired. Later, after meeting up with Ida, the two moved toward the briefing room where students from many schools had gathered. Draken's confidence sank as he surveyed them, aware that everyone around him had unique strengths and powers different from his own. His heart quickened and doubt crowded him. A strange red glow seemed to creep into his vision as his anxiety mounted. Ida noticed the change and placed a steadying hand on Draken's shoulder, asking if he was all right and reminding him not to space out during the exam explanation. Draken forced himself to breathe and admitted that he had been overthinking things. Ida urged him to shake it off because the presentation was about to begin. The lights rose and a large screen came to life above the stage, revealing a man with an eccentric hairstyle. The man introduced himself as the school DJ in an upbeat tone and tried to rally the room with dramatic poses and boisterous energy. He explained the practical exam and sought to energize the candidates, but the auditorium remained largely silent. The man braved a final flourish to hype them up, and Draken found himself tilting his head, wondering if the presenter was a hero of some kind. He acted like an overzealous teenager, huffing and hunching over, unable to shake his anxiety. He still felt awful. The green-haired boy from earlier was enthusiastically admiring the pro-hero, and Draken wondered if the boy was all right in the head. The pro-hero announced that, as the application stated, the examinees would conduct 10-minute mock battles in various urban settings. He explained that the screen behind him displayed battle centers labeled A through G, and that as soon as he finished, they would head to their assigned centers. Draken and Ida checked their tickets and discovered they had been split between centers. Draken was in A and Ida in B. Draken sighed heavily and fell into despair at being separated from his friend. Ida reflected that the pairings were deliberate, meant to prevent friends, classmates, or people from the same school from helping each other. He noticed muttering behind him and glanced back with a cold look at the green-haired boy. Draken, slouched and disappointed, grumbled that the split was a major bummer. The screen showed a city scene with silhouettes of 3 types of training robots. The pro-hero described the trial. The goal was to raise a score by using quirks to defeat foe villains, but contestants had to keep things heroic and avoid attacking other examinees, a strict UA rule. Ida frowned at the pamphlet and called the setup absurd. Draken warned him not to make a scene. Ida stood and raised his hand to ask a question. The pro-hero responded playfully and then acknowledged Ida, explaining that the 4th silhouette on the printout was intentional. He clarified that the 4th type was worth 0 points and served as an obstacle to avoid rather than an enemy worth engaging, and he recommended focusing on the top-scoring targets. Ida thanked him, though he winced from Draken's earlier kick to his shin. Draken scolded Ida for never letting things roll off his back. The pro-hero finished with a flourish, reciting a motto about overcoming misfortune and urging the examinees to go beyond. He wished them luck and reminded them to prepare for more than just books. Later, after a bus ride, Draken arrived at Battle Center A in his training clothes. He stayed at the back of the group, avoiding others. He noticed an ash-blonde competitor again and tried to place him, though he could not remember who the boy was. The facility doors opened and the blonde charged inside, propelling himself forward with an explosive burst of power that launched him into the course. Other examinees protested that the start had not been announced, but the pro-hero's voice cut across the protest and urged everyone to run, reminding them that real battles had no countdowns. Caught off guard, Draken admonished himself and activated the scales on his arms and legs before taking off. He passed other competitors as he steeled himself with the memory of training sessions where he had attacked dummies prepared by Ida. He resolved he could perform even better now. From an alley, a 1-point training robot rolled out and announced its target in a robotic tone. Draken braced and took a glancing blow against his scaled hide, then surged forward and struck the robot. His punch dented its casing, and the machine toppled and powered down. He felt a surge of confidence and moved on toward the more chaotic areas of the course, where the blonde competitor unleashed a massive explosive attack that cleared a group of robots. Draken stood back and assessed the situation, deciding to head somewhere less crowded if he wanted to collect points. Throughout the exam, Draken darted into engagements with determined, anime-style flair, launching powerful kicks and scale-armored punches that disabled several robots. One robot attempted a sneak attack, but he spun and delivered a precise heel strike that sent it stumbling and shutting down. He exhaled a visible plume of mist and pressed onward, focused on racking up points and proving himself. He heard a woman scream and ran toward the sound. Emerging from an alley, he saw a girl from the front gate surrounded by multiple robots, 1-pointers, 2-pointers, and 3-pointers. Draken thought she needed help, but everything seemed to slow as he worried that getting sidetracked could cost him his future and his chance to succeed. He began to leave. The girl stumbled and fell, reaching out for help. Draken spun and rushed in. Time snapped back to normal just as a robot struck. The girl cried out and suddenly found herself in Draken's arms, surprised. Draken kept his gaze on the robots and asked if she was all right. The girl shrieked and demanded that he let her go, then shoved him and broke free. Draken protested that he had only been trying to help. A robot rolled forward to punch him. He blocked and stumbled back as his scales shed. He muttered a curse and formed a new set. The girl glanced at the swarm of robots and decided she could not handle it. She fled. Draken watched her run and demanded to himself why she had left him there. He leaped back to dodge an attack from the nearest three-pointer. When he landed, a tremor ran through the ground. He dashed forward, kicked a one-pointer with raw strength, used it as a spring to slam both fists into a two-pointer's vital mechanism, then pushed off and crashed down with his feet into the three-pointer, sending it sliding across the street. He looked up as an explosion and a rising smoke cloud marked another battle center in the distance, and he wondered if it was another match. The announcer mic called out that there was just 1 minute left. Draken snapped back to the present and scanned the remaining swarm. His eyes flashed crimson as he surged forward, motion blurring into a dark streak. When the final minute ended, Mike declared that time was up. The siren blared. Draken sat on a downed three-pointer, breathing heavily as his last scales fell away. He scratched his cheek and tried to remember his score, then gave up and decided to go home. As he walked forward into the dark, he reflected that his entrance exam had come to an end. He wondered whether he had qualified, but he resolved that this was the story of how he would become the strongest hero. A void of shadow filled his mind. A crimson ember flared and sparked with black electricity, and in that inner roar he introduced himself as Draken Tatsuma and claimed the identity of a dragon. A week after the UA entrance exam, Draken trained in his room at night. He did push-ups and then stood to inspect his reflection, noting his thin but toned form and the sharp protrusions along his spine and shoulder blades. He exhaled, thought he looked decent, and admitted to himself that he wanted to become more muscular. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. The message was from Tenya Ida, who reported that he had received his UA letter and was checking whether Draken had received his as well. Draken sighed, thinking about how formal Ida always sounded. Suddenly realizing the letters had been sent out, he rushed for his door and yanked it open, only to find his parents waiting, his mother holding an envelope stamped with the UA seal. Ryuka narrowed her eyes and told him to take it, doubting anything good would come of it. Draken snatched the envelope and slammed the door in their faces. At his desk, he tore the envelope open eagerly. A coin-like device rolled out and activated, projecting a holographic image of All Might. All Might appeared as a recorded message, announcing he was in Japan to teach at UA and to present the exam results. Draken started in disbelief, then listened as All Might explained that Draken had accumulated 28 total villain points during the practical exam. Draken remembered fighting until his last scales had fallen. All Might smiled and said there was more to the physical test than just fighting villains and that there was a second reward. A small feed appeared in the corner of the screen, announcing rescue points and showing Draken rushing in to save a girl. The feed praised his choice to stop and help another competitor, calling it the spirit of a hero. Draken's eyes widened as he realized All Might thought him heroic. His hand tightened on the edge of the desk as memories of his family's doubts pressed in. He felt a brief thrill of pride at the recognition. All Might announced that for saving a life Draken had earned 30 rescue points, bringing his total to 58, and that his written tests had been exceptional. All Might then extended an open hand and welcomed Draken Tatsuma to UA, officially granting him admission. Draken leapt up in disbelief and joy, shouting that he had been accepted. His room door slammed open as both his parents entered. Ryuka's face showed furious shock while Ruji's expression was more intrigued. Ryuka accused him of being a beast and insisted they could not seriously let him go, calling his acceptance pure dumb luck. Ruji responded by reminding everyone of the deal they had made and refused to break his word, insisting that Draken was to attend UA. Draken covered his mouth, looking down as he stammered that he had been accepted and reminded them that a deal was a deal. He thanked his father timidly. Ruji turned away, telling him not to thank him but to prove he was cut out for heroism, and then walked out. Ryuka continued to object, but Ruji held firm and they both left with the door slamming behind them. Alone for a moment, Draken let out a soft laugh, then grabbed his phone, eager to tell a rival about the news. At UA, a monitoring room filled with faculty watched a large screen that displayed the examination results and a top 10 list. 10th place Fumikage Tokoyami, 9th place Tetsutetsu, 8th place Draken Tatsuma, 7th place Izuku Midoriya, 6th place Tenya Ida, 5th place Itsuka Kendo, 4th place Ibara Shizaki, 3rd place Ochako Uraraka, 2nd place Ejiro Kirishima, and 1st place Katsuki Bakugo. One faculty member pointed out the results with excitement. A female educator noted that the student in first place had not accumulated any rescue points. Another described the first-place student's performance. He had taken down the faux villains decisively while many examinees fled from the main obstacle, showing exceptional focus and combat skill. The same faculty member observed that the examinee who handled the giant robot with a single devastating attack had clearly pushed himself hard, perhaps beyond what his body was used to. A different faculty member commented that the examinee in 7th place had no villain points. When the screen focused on Draken, one of the monitors noted that he had not been exceptional but had taken down as many faux villains as he could despite clear limitations to his quirk, demonstrating an awareness of his weaknesses and a willingness to avoid taking hits while protecting others. Another faculty member added that he had even stepped in to save someone. A colleague observed that Draken sometimes appeared to move on impulse and that his appearance was unsettling to some. Nearby, a man with black hair and a scarf listened to the discussion with a measured, analytical expression. Back at the Tatsuma residence, Draken grinned over his acceptance letter and imagined the new journey ahead, determined to become the strongest hero in history. On the first day of UA, the morning was bright. The Tatsuma household buzzed with excitement from Draken alone. Dressed in his uniform and carrying his backpack, Draken hurried past his mother's room. Ryuka shouted after him in anger, calling him a beast, but he kept going. When the glare from the open front door faded, Kuga was waiting outside and offered to drive him. Draken nodded and made his way down the steps as Kuga opened the car door for him. The driver glanced back and up, seeing Ryuji standing by an open window. The two men met each other's eyes for a moment before both turned away. Draken bobbed his knee in the back seat and covered his mouth, telling Kuga that he could not be late. Kuga looked in the rearview mirror as he settled into the driver's seat and chuckled, saying he was glad to see Draken so lively. Draken scratched his cheek and looked away, flushed, insisting that he was not excited and only did not want to get in trouble. Kuga thought that young Draken's body language always betrayed him. He started the car and they left the estate, driving toward UA High. One car ride later, UA High. After being dropped off, Draken moved through the school's massive halls with his hands in his pockets, taking in the winding staircases and grand architecture with a nervous sweat. He muttered that the place felt like a maze and noticed classroom 1A up ahead. He slid the door open and immediately encountered 3 people: Ida, the brown-haired girl from the exam, and the green-haired boy. Ida stepped forward with a smile and expressed relief that Draken had arrived early. The brown-haired girl looked at them curiously and asked if they knew each other. Izuku mirrored her expression. Ida stood beside Draken and introduced him as Draken Tatsuma, his closest friend, explaining that they had attended the same middle school and trained for the entrance exam together. Draken rolled his eyes behind his hair, unnoticed. Izuku, surprised, stepped forward and introduced himself as Izuku Midoriya, saying it was nice to meet Tatsuma. Draken's eyes narrowed briefly, and Izuku reacted with alarm, worried that he had offended Draken. Ida quickly apologized and clarified that Draken preferred to be called by his given name rather than his surname. Draken looked away while Ida rubbed the back of his head, explaining that Draken would not say why. Uraraka, the brown-haired girl, moved closer and reminded Draken that she remembered him from the entrance exam, mentioning that his bag had been hanging open. She noted that he did not seem very talkative. Ida stepped in and asked the others not to take it personally, explaining that Draken was simply not good with new people. A dry, tired voice then carried from behind them, warning that if anyone was only there to make friends they could pack up now. The students looked toward the doorway and found the startling sight of a man still wrapped in a sleeping bag. He introduced himself as Shota Aizawa, their teacher, and the students watched in disbelief as he pulled a flat pouch from the sleeping bag and consumed whatever was inside. He zipped himself out of the bag, remarking that it had taken 8 seconds for the students to fall silent and that time was precious. He held up the sleeping bag and rummaged inside, pulling out a tracksuit and instructing everyone to put the garments on and head outside. Draken's heart sank and he thought that he wanted to go home already. Later, the students changed into the provided training gear out of sight. While changing had been taking place, a very tall student with multiple arms and a masked face, Shoji, noticed Draken and gave a soft, curious hum as he observed the way Draken kept his features and mutations guarded. Outside, the whole class assembled on a training ground. Aizawa stood before them and announced that he would administer a quirk assessment test, prompting similar shocked reactions across the group. Uraraka protested that they would miss orientation, but Aizawa replied that those who wanted to make it in the field could not waste time on pointless ceremonies and that he would run his class as he saw fit. He reminded them that although they had taken standardized tests their whole lives, they had not previously had the chance to use their quirks in physical exams. He stressed that the country preferred to pretend everyone was created equal by limiting opportunities for those with greater power, and that such pretenses were not rational. Aizawa stepped forward and addressed the class, telling them that someday the Ministry of Education would hear about them. He singled out the blonde student and told Bakugo that he had scored the highest on the entrance exam. Aizawa then asked Bakugo what his farthest softball throw in junior high had been. Bakugo tilted his head down slightly and confidently answered that he thought it had been 67 meters. Aizawa remained serious and instructed Bakugo to try doing it using his quirk. He produced a softball and tossed it to Bakugo, who stepped into the throwing circle while the rest of the class watched from a distance. Aizawa reminded them that anything went as long as they stayed in the circle and urged him to proceed, impatient for results. Bakugo shifted forward, began to stretch with a blank expression, and muttered that they had asked for it. He planted his foot and stretched further. Draken stood nearby with Ida and thought that the blonde student looked familiar. He watched Bakugo reel back and throw with full force. Explosives flared from Bakugo's hands and the ball shot into the sky. Draken's eyes widened behind his hair. Izuku stood close to Draken and watched with a fearful, blank expression. Aizawa and Bakugo watched the ball arc down in the distance. Aizawa told the class that they needed to know their maximum capabilities. The ball landed and his phone beeped. He showed the class the stats and revealed a distance of 705.2 meters, which made most of the students gasp. A student with yellow hair smiled nervously and reacted with disbelief at the 705 meters. The pink-haired girl clapped her hands together and leaned forward, saying that she wanted to try because it looked like fun. Another excited student declared that this was exactly what they were talking about, using quirks freely. Aizawa's expression darkened and he spoke with an ominous tone, reminding them that the academy was not just for games. He warned that they had 3 years to become heroes and that hardships and dangers were part of the job. He outlined that the class would face 8 physical tests to gauge potential and that whoever placed last would be expelled. Immediately, the announcement caused gasps and screams across the classroom as Aizawa made it clear that he alone decided how the class would run and that anyone who disagreed could leave now. Many students steeled themselves, and Draken exhaled a puff of smoke while Ida adjusted his glasses. Draken flexed his hands slightly and thought the whole exercise was unnecessary. Uraraka stepped forward defiantly and protested that they had just arrived and it would be unfair to send someone home on the spot. Aizawa countered by pointing out the unfairness of the world itself: natural disasters, power-hungry villains, catastrophic accidents, and insisted that heroes had to push themselves to face such threats. He declared that UA would subject them to repeated hardships and challenged them to show that they belonged. He told them to go beyond, plus ultra, and then announced that they were wasting time and that the test should begin. The tests began. On the first event, the 50-meter dash, Draken crouched at the line across from a boy named Koda. When the tracker robot signaled start, Draken burst forward with above-human speed and crossed the line first in 4.21 seconds, while Koda followed in 9.6 seconds. Draken glanced at the heavily breathing boy and scratched his cheek, thinking that the result was not bad but still not on Ida's level. Aizawa watched with a blank expression and noted that there was still no outstanding quirk potential visible. An announcer froze the scene to introduce Draken Tatsuma. The announcer described his quirk, Dragon Scale. Draken could sprout scales on his arms to enhance his strength and durability, though they shed when overworked. During the second test, the grip strength measurement, Draken stood in his section, formed scales on his left hand up to his elbow, and squeezed the grip. He managed over 200 kilograms with a heavy sigh from exertion. Nearby, 3 students commented, in all one impressed by a much higher score set by a tall, muscular student and another likened that high score to a muscular octopus. Draken looked away with a huff. The third test was the standing long jump. After the student with the unusual belly button quirk, Draken took his turn. He rushed forward using his enhanced strength, jumped, and barely reached the other side, stumbling and waving his arms to regain balance. The fourth test measured repeated side steps, and Draken achieved a respectable rate of 4 steps per second. The fifth test was the ball throw. Uraraka used her quirk to float the ball and achieved an effectively infinite score, shocking the class. Other students followed in turn until Aizawa looked up from his phone and called Draken's name, indicating it was his turn next. Draken covered his mouth with his hand and took a small, steadying breath. Draken stepped up to the pitch and took the softball in his clawed hand. He inhaled through his nose, swallowed, and thought about whether he could match the distance of the explosive thrower. He formed scales on his hand up to his elbow and told himself that this was the moment. Aizawa narrowed his eyes and observed the scales. He considered that Draken's quirk might be a single-use enhancement and wondered about its long-term potential, despite Draken's family background. He watched as Draken's arm reared back, the scales tightening and locking into place instead of shedding. Draken let his arms snap forward like a catapult, hoping the motion would look impressive. The ball launched from his hand with a sharp burst. Aizawa noticed a shockwave trailing the ball as it flew. The ball carried forward on force, then slowed in midair and descended, bouncing slightly on impact. Aizawa checked his screen and displayed a reading of 405.6 meters. Draken felt an internal rush of triumph but kept his expression still while Aizawa simply moved on and called the next student. Draken stood frozen for a moment, silently questioning whether that distance was enough. Draken walked back to the others with a slight slouch in defeat while Ida offered a proud smile. Draken was too busy pouting to react. Next up was Izuku, who stepped onto the pitch and paused with the ball, thinking. Ida stood with his arms folded and warned that if Midoriya did not shape up, he would be the one going home. Bakugo, standing to Ida's right, responded that of course he would be, angrily calling Izuku a quirkless loser. Draken covered his mouth and muttered that was harsh. Ida, stammering as he lowered his arms, objected that Izuku did have a quirk and reminded them of what had happened at the entrance exam. Draken tilted his head in confusion while Bakugo made a disgruntled sound. Aizawa watched with a neutral expression. Midoriya drew back, appearing to channel his power as he prepared to throw the ball, but Aizawa's eyes flashed and the throw stalled. The ball bounced ahead for a 46-meter score, leaving Izuku staring in shock. Midoriya rose, confused, saying that he had been trying to use his quirk and looked down at his hand. Aizawa spoke with seriousness and let his scarves float around him as he explained that he had erased Midoriya's quirk. He lectured that the judges for the exam had been too trusting and that someone like Midoriya should not be allowed to enroll at the school. Midoriya narrowed his eyes, then suddenly realized the truth and gasped, identifying Aizawa as the erasure hero, Eraserhead. Several classmates clustered together, talking about their teacher's identity. Draken watched Izuku and wondered about the nature of his power. He paused and then noticed a large man peeking from a nearby corner. All Might was hiding by the wall and ducked when Draken spotted him. Draken tilted his head at the oddity, then returned his attention to Aizawa, who continued lecturing Izuku and wrapped him briefly in scarves to emphasize his point about how impractical the ability seemed. Aizawa finished by telling Midoriya there was no way he could become a hero, and most of the class gasped. Draken hunched over with a sigh. The situation felt all too familiar and it irritated him, but he reminded himself it was not his problem. Aizawa then retracted his scarves and deactivated his quirk, his hair settling back into place, and told Midoriya he had returned his ability and to take his final throw without delay. The class watched to see if their teacher had offered him any advice. Bakugo scoffed that Aizawa had probably told Midoriya to start packing. Draken covered his mouth and wondered why Bakugo was still lingering. Bakugo's fury flared, and he shouted at Draken, calling him shaggy hair. Ida stepped between them while Draken simply huffed and turned away. Aoyama stood beside Uraraka and attempted a supportive gesture by placing a hand on her shoulder. Uraraka recoiled slightly, uncomfortable. Uraraka asked who he was, confused. The class turned their attention back to Midoriya, who stood for a long while under Aizawa's watchful, judgmental gaze. Then Izuku drew back and threw the ball once more. Draken's eyes honed in on a faint glow around Midoriya's pointer finger as the ball rocketed into the air. Izuku's arm hung limply and his finger looked injured. Izuku looked over at everyone and gave a small thumbs up. Aizawa allowed a small smile as Midoriya achieved a remarkable score of 705.3 and stood determined, clenching his fist with a resolute smile at their teacher. The class remained in the training courtyard after Izuku's throw. Most of the students were in awe or shock. Some were excited, others angry or indifferent at the display of raw strength. A blonde student called out that Midoriya had thrown it over 700 meters. Uraraka, beside Draken, raised her arms excitedly and celebrated that he had finally shown his true power. Ida shaded his eyes with a hand and observed that Midoriya's finger appeared injured, noting that it resembled the odd behavior at the entrance exam. Draken, between Ida and Uraraka, covered his mouth and said he did not care. He thought it had been impressive. Aoyama commented that it was not a particularly pretty throw. Bakugo stood with his jaw hanging open in disbelief. His hands trembled and emitted uncontrolled explosions as he declared he would get to the bottom of it. He charged forward toward Midoriya and demanded to know how he had done it in a threatening tone, prompting Izuku to flinch in fear. Before Bakugo could reach him, Aizawa's scarves flew out and wrapped around Bakugo's head and torso, preventing him from advancing. Bakugo struggled and demanded to know why the scarf was so strong. Aizawa explained calmly that the scarf was a capture weapon made of carbon fiber and a special metal alloy, and he told Bakugo to stand down. He warned that it would be unwise to force him to use his quirk too much, complaining that it caused him dry eye. The class cheered in unison that Midoriya's power was amazing. Aizawa then retracted his scarf, deactivated his quirk, and remarked that they were wasting his time. Bakugo turned and walked off while Izuku moved wearily away and returned to Uraraka, Ida, and Draken. Uraraka worriedly asked if his finger was okay. Izuku responded nervously that it was fine. Draken leaned in, covering his mouth, and remarked that the finger looked gross. Bakugo looked over furiously, jaw clenched. After the rest of the physical fitness tests, Draken and the others gathered around Aizawa by a building. Izuku lay exhausted on the ground from the exercises while Draken stood beside Ida as usual. Aizawa quietly explained that it was time to give results and pulled out his phone, saying he had ranked them all and would show the full list rather than go through every score. Draken watched the holographic list appear and saw himself in 7th place. He scratched his cheek and thought it was a jackpot. He also saw Midoriya in last place and felt a pang of sympathy as he looked at the defeated boy. Aizawa then turned off the hologram and dryly admitted that he had been lying. No one was going home. He explained it had been a calculated deception to make sure everyone gave their best during the tests. The students reacted with confusion and alarm. Izuku went pale and cried out along with Ida and Uraraka while Draken scratched his cheek behind them. A dark-haired girl, hand on her hip, said she was surprised the rest of them had not figured it out and offered a half-hearted apology that she probably should have spoken up. Draken looked at her blankly. His red eyes flashed behind his hair and she gave a nervous smile. Draken huffed and turned away, thinking these people were insufferable. The bald boy with headphones and the yellow-haired student muttered in agreement that she should have said something. Aizawa announced they were done for the day and instructed them to pick up a syllabus in the classroom and read it before the next morning. Midoriya let out a heavy sigh and Draken patted his back. Aizawa stopped by Midoriya, called his name, and told him to take a note to the nurse so she could fix him up. He warned that training would be tougher tomorrow and to make sure he was prepared. Izuku accepted the nurse's note. Draken covered his mouth and commented to Uraraka and Ida that Aizawa was intense. Ida and Uraraka nodded in agreement. After orientation ended that afternoon, Draken and Ida were strolling out of campus when they spotted Midoriya walking ahead, deep in thought and looking tired. They approached him from either side and Ida placed a hand on his shoulder to get his attention. Midoriya jumped slightly and greeted Ida. Ida, serious as ever, asked how the broken finger was doing. Midoriya relaxed and lifted the bandaged finger, crediting Recovery Girl for helping it heal. The three began walking together, Midoriya with his fists clenched in thought. Ida admitted he was a bit concerned by Aizawa's approach to class but expressed trust in the school's judgment, noting that UA was the top program. He added that lying was downright immoral. Midoriya thought that while Ida seemed scary at first, he was simply very serious about school. Draken covered his mouth and dryly told Ida that he just could not handle not knowing everything. Ida stiffened and insisted he did not like underhanded tactics being used to manipulate others. Uraraka called out from behind them and hurried to catch up, introducing herself with a bright smile. She reminded them of her name and confirmed the others' names: Tenya Ida, Draken Tatsuma, and Deku Midoriya. Midoriya looked surprised when she used the nickname Deku. Uraraka explained that Bakugo had used that name during the fitness test. Midoriya shyly explained that Deku was what Kaken used to tease him and that his actual name was Izuku. Ida frowned and called that unsportsmanlike. Draken, hand over his mouth, observed that Bakugo was intense. Uraraka apologized and then said she actually liked the name Deku and thought it could make a great hero name, even adding that it sounded cute. Midoriya blushed deeply and accepted Deku as his hero name. Ida was surprised at how easily Midoriya agreed. Draken muttered that their reactions were obvious. Midoriya turned away, flustered, and said his whole world felt turned upside down, while Uraraka tilted her head and smiled. The next day, Draken and the rest of Class 1A attended English with present mic for the first PRD. Most of the class looked bored. During lunch, Draken sat with Izuku, Ida, and Uraraka. He did not eat while Izuku fawned over the cook, who was also a pro hero. In the afternoon it was finally time for hero basic training. All Might's voice filled the hallway as he made a dramatic entrance in his red costume. The students watched in awe as he marched to the front, and comments of excitement rippled through the group. Draken looked on with curiosity as All Might stood with his hands on his hips and welcomed them to what he called the most important class at UA, Heroing 101, where they would learn the basics of being a professional hero. All Might began the lesson with an energetic declaration about what it meant to fight in the name of good, striking a pose and urging the students to get to it. He turned back to the class and held up a card labeled Battle, announcing that today's lesson would pull no punches. Draken covered his mouth and asked if it was fight training. Bakugo grinned and confirmed it was. Izuku looked frightened and asked if it was real combat. All Might hunched over dramatically and said that one of the keys of being a hero was looking good. He pointed a remote at a nearby wall. The wall slid open to reveal shelves of suitcases numbered 1 through 21. All Might explained that the costumes had been designed for each student based on their quirk registration forms and the requests they had submitted before school started. The class erupted into cheers. Draken exhaled, remembering the requests he had sent in and hoping the designers had gotten them right. All Might barked that everyone should get suited up and meet at Training Ground Beta. The class responded in unison, and later, in the school's locker room, classmates changed into their outfits while Draken stood and steadied himself before opening his suitcase. At Training Ground Beta, All Might stood with his hands on his hips facing a dark tunnel. Footsteps approached from within, and students began emerging into the light. All Might beamed and said that clothes made the pro, and the students were living proof. He praised how cool they looked as one by one, Class 1A stepped into the light in their costumes, which included grenade-like gauntlets, a weighted belt, and armored legs. Turning serious, All Might asked if they were ready to start and teased them about being newbies. Izuku ran out in his homemade green costume. Uraraka greeted Izuku and complimented his costume. Midoriya reacted awkwardly to the scene. Mineta, nearby, gave a thumbs up and expressed his enthusiasm for the school. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from the tunnel behind them. Izuku and Uraraka looked back, uncertain if someone else was coming. A pair of crimson eyes flashed from the darkness and the two of them shrieked, thinking it was a monster. The figure stepped into the light and revealed himself. Draken raised his hands in surrender and told them to calm down, explaining that it was only him. Izuku's eyes widened at the sight and blurted a familiar name before correcting himself. He admitted he had not expected such a costume from someone like Draken. Draken sighed and explained that he did not usually go for big, flashy looks and that he had not been specific about the features he wanted. Uraraka apologized for screaming and said he had looked a little terrifying. Draken scoffed and folded his arms at the remark, annoyed but composed. Izuku and Uraraka both thought that Draken seemed to have more attitude with his face fully covered. All Might then called for everyone's attention and announced that it was time for combat training. Ida, wearing a full suit of armor, raised a hand and asked if they would be conducting urban battles again in the fake city from their entrance exam. All Might responded that this exercise would be a step ahead. Most villain encounters happened indoors. He explained that villains often hid in backrooms, home invasions, or underground lairs, and that for this training they would split into teams of heroes and villains to fight 2-on-2 indoor battles. Froppy hesitated and suggested the exercise sounded advanced. All Might insisted that the best training came on the battlefield but warned that they could not treat opponents like punching bags this time, as they would be dealing with actual people. A black-haired classmate asked whether All Might would decide the winners. Bakugo asked how much they could hurt the other team. Uraraka nervously wondered if losers would be expelled as a prior example had suggested. Ida raised procedural questions about how teams would be chosen. Aoyama showed off his sparkly cape. All Might pulled out a script and outlined the scenario. The villains had hidden a nuclear missile somewhere in their hideout. The heroes needed to foil the plan by catching the villains or recovering the weapon, while the villains would win by protecting the payload or capturing the heroes. Draken folded his arms and considered what the mission meant. He thought that success would depend heavily on teammates, since none of them knew much about each other's quirks yet, and that lack of cooperation could make a team fail. All Might produced a box and announced that time was limited and teams would be chosen by drawing lots. Ida leaned forward and asked if there might be a better way. Izuku stopped Ida and urged him to think about the situation, leaving the class to prepare for the drawing. All Might explained that professionals often had to team up with heroes from other agencies at a moment's notice, which was why they were doing this exercise. Ida realized that life was a random series of events, bowed, and excused his rudeness. Draken huffed that it was frustrating to have to work with total strangers, then pointed his thumb toward Bakugo and asked what would happen if Izuku ended up stuck with him. Bakugo reacted furiously and demanded what that was supposed to mean, calling Draken Dragon Boy. Izuku went rigid with shock at the sight of Draken standing up to Bakugo. All Might turned the conversation down and raised his fist to announce that they would draw teams. The students drew lots. Team A became Izuku and Draken. Team B was the arm-powered student and the ice user. Team C was the purple ball-headed student and the black-haired student. Team D was Bakugo and Ida. Team E was Mina and Aoyama. Team F was Koda and the lip-focused student. Team G was the yellow-haired student with earphones. Team H was the frog girl and the bird-like student. Team I included the invisible girl and the tail-bearing student with Uraraka. Team J was the elbow-powered student and the red-haired student. Draken stood beside Izuku and remarked that they were a team now, sighing heavily and asking Izuku not to make them lose. Izuku waved his hands anxiously and promised to do his best. Draken looked away with a small huff. All Might brought out 2 more boxes labeled Hero and Villain and drew the letters to determine the first match. He declared that Team A would be the heroes and Team D would take the villains. The rest of the class was to head to the monitoring room to watch. The rest of the class answered in unison and began to walk off. Uraraka wished Izuku good luck as she left. Izuku gave Bakugo a nervous smile. Bakugo glared back intensely, forcing Izuku to look away and shrink back before he clenched his fist and steeled himself. Bakugo made a surprised noise followed by a frown and low growl. Draken stood with Ida and watched the exchange, calling them weird. Ida nodded. All Might led the villain team to a building and instructed them to get set up inside. He warned that in 5 minutes the good guys would be released and the battle would begin. Ida acknowledged the order, and he and Bakugo entered the building. Before the villains went in, All Might advised Ida and Bakugo that the key to success in the challenge was to embody villainy and think from the perspective of an evildoer. Ida replied seriously that he understood. Bakugo watched Izuku closely. All Might added that he would step in if things went too far. Ida agreed and Bakugo growled as they entered. Outside, Draken stood with Izuku while they waited to enter. Izuku was sweating through his outfit as he studied the building floor plan All Might had provided. Draken asked what Bakugo's deal was. Izuku explained that Bakugo had been that way since they were kids. Draken asked why Izuku had just let him be that way. Izuku slouched and admitted that he had not had the courage to stand up to Bakugo before, at least not without getting hurt for it. Draken put his hands behind his head and offered a blunt bit of advice. The sooner Izuku proved he was not a pushover, the sooner people would leave him alone. His eyes narrowed with a flash of remembered anger from his own past. Izuku inhaled, surprised that Draken seemed to understand. He apologized hurriedly for using the wrong form of address, having forgotten the last name custom. Draken closed his eyes and dismissed it. All Might called the start of indoor combat training and announced that Team A and Team D's time began. Draken and Izuku went serious and moved forward. Izuku signaled a route through an alley. Draken agreed. They approached the side of the building and slipped through an open window. Draken landed inside and looked around, commenting that getting in had been easy. Izuku warned that there were many blind spots. They moved right, walked down a hall, checked corners, and proceeded carefully. Izuku was distracted by his own overthinking but tried to stay focused. Draken's ears perked and he warned Izuku to look out. Bakugo appeared from above around a corner and launched an aggressive attack. Draken jumped in and grew scales on his right arm and fist, colliding with Bakugo's blast. The impact created an explosion and a cloud of smoke. Draken slid free of the blast into Izuku's path. Izuku pushed himself in front of Draken to check if he was okay. Draken coughed smoke but said he was fine, noting that his scales had flaked off where the impact hit and that his quirk had taken a large blow. Izuku was stunned that Draken had stopped Bakugo's blast with his quirk. A commentator offstage explained that Draken Tatsuma's quirk, Dragon Scale, allowed him to grow scales on his arms that boosted his already enhanced physicality, but that those scales shed when they took a heavy hit. As the dust cleared, Bakugo wafted the smoke away with his arm. Bakugo complained that Draken was annoying even in a fight. Draken asked Bakugo to pick a name and stick with it. Izuku stood beside Draken in a fighting stance. Bakugo taunted Izuku, implying that he must be scared to let Draken handle him first. Izuku replied that he had warned Draken that Bakugo would try a surprise attack to take him out early. Draken shed and regrew scales on both arms and flexed his claws, explaining that they had played it cautious until Bakugo decided to show himself. Bakugo's expression hardened. He clenched his jaw and prepared to press the attack. In the monitoring room, the rest of Class 1A and All Might watched feeds from the building. The purple ball-headed student remarked in surprise that Bakugo had almost gotten the jump on them. The red-haired student shouted angrily about the sneak attack. A spectator slammed a fist into his palm and demanded to know what kind of man would pull a cheap stunt like that. All Might intervened, noting that it was a viable strategy and that the man was playing the part of a true villain. The pink-haired girl reacted with excitement that it had not worked and that Tatsuma had blocked the move. The yellow-haired observer pointed out where someone had gone. Back in the training building, Bakugo charged at Draken and Izuku with his arms positioned to fire explosions, a wild grin on his face. He announced that he wanted to hurt them enough to force a stoppage, pulling his right arm back as he prepared to strike. Seeing Draken as the biggest threat, Bakugo threw his right arm toward him, but Izuku followed through with the plan. He rushed in, grabbed Bakugo's arm, pivoted, and flipped Bakugo over his shoulder, slamming him down. Bakugo made a pained sound as he hit the ground. Draken smirked behind his mask and clenched his fists, calling the move impressive. Izuku panted while Bakugo slowly sat up. Izuku explained that he had watched Bakugo for years and knew he always started with a big right hook. He said he had analyzed every notable hero, including Bakugo, and had learned everything he could from the notebook Bakugo had burned and discarded. Bakugo's pupils narrowed and his jaw tightened as Izuku straightened and declared that although the name Deku could be used, he was no longer the helpless kid he had once been. Izuku stated that he had changed and that Deku was now the name of a Draken, remembering that Uraraka had once liked the name Deku, snorted and teased that Izuku was acting like a romantic, making Izuku flush. Bakugo rose slowly, forcing Draken and Izuku to take defensive positions on either side of him. He turned to face Izuku and hunched forward, accusing him of trembling with fear while his hands crackled with energy. Izuku's eyes filled with tears, but he clenched his teeth. Bakugo yelled that this was why he hated him. Ryuji looked at Draken and asked whether he would give up now and return to a mundane life, or risk everything, escape and live freely instead of chasing what Ryuji called a foolish desire to fail as a hero. Draken paused, thought deeply, felt resolve build in his chest, and then agreed to the deal. Everything went blank.